Listening to this down at Church House is Janet Street Porter, with one or two people who are quite interested in the way this may go. Janet?
Thank you. I'm with Trevor Phillips and Bob Scott. Trevor, all the candidates who've declared their hands so far have moaned on about the fact that London seems to subsidise the rest of the country, and the Lord Mayor's first concern should be organising getting back some of this cash. Is that what you think?
Well, I think most Londoners are very happy to see their place as the capital being to earn wealth and to help much of the rest of the country. But we have major problems of investment, we have major problems of social inequality in this city, we have problems of crime. We need more coppers, for example. And that means that we've got to keep a little bit more of the money that we earn. Currently, we provide 16.5% of the country's GDP, though we're only 12% of the population. All I think Londoners would say is that we'd like a little bit more to deal with our problems.
How much money does that mean that London gets back?
Well, we currently export something like £10 billion. I don't know what the numbers should be, but it would be good to see a proportion of that to try and at least deal with the fundamental problems that we've got in our transport,
So who gets all this money? Are there specific parts of the country that get it, or specific areas?
Well, I think most of it goes pretty much
Scotland?
to all the rest of the country. Scotland is one place, and I have been described as the most unpopular person in Scotland.
Well, what about Manchester? I'm asking you that because Bob's sitting next to you. What about Manchester?
Well, Manchester gets a bit of dosh from us, and we should enter in a negotiation about it.
Well, I wouldn't be going on any train trips for a while.
We should enter into a discussion
Bob,
about
you
it.
led Manchester's bid for the Olympics. Do you feel that a strong mayor for London is bad news for the rest of the country?
Well, I think there are two questions. I mean, I think there is an international perception and there's an internal perception. I mean, the internal need for civic leadership in London is obvious. I mean, the fact that Manchester, Sheffield, Birmingham consistently beat London was because London really didn't exist, and was pathetic.
Now, one of the things that's been said is that this mayor has to go out and get big events for London. Will that mean that it's harder for Manchester to mount things like an Olympic bid in the future, that everything will become more southern-based?
Well, don't forget that when we bat internationally, the people we're talking with want us to, as a country, to bat with our first division. And frankly, when Lille bid for the Olympics, everybody said, why wasn't it Paris? And to some extent, when Manchester was bidding, people said, why wasn't it London? So we have to face up to that.
But if Trevor has his way, the rest of the country will be impoverished. Everybody north of Watford will be paying money back to us.
Steady on. No, look, the point is London is the gateway to the rest of the country. 27 million tourists come to Britain, 11 or 14 million of them come through London, and the rest of the country benefits because people come to London and they go to the Lake District, they go to Manchester, they go to Scotland. The point is, we're a capital city, we should be allowed to play the role of a capital city. That's the point that we're making.
But is this mayor going to have any real power? They're not going to be in charge of health or education. Are they going to be more than a figurehead? I mean, if they're only going to have an assembly of 25 people, is that truly representative of such a big city
all
as
I can say is if that is what's going to happen, then you might have just well stuck with a cheap Lord Mayor, as it were. And I mean, it really has got to change. I hope that there will be, as it were, an agenda that will start once the mayor is in position to change things.
Well, do you think the proposed powers are wide-ranging enough? We've talked about the mayor being directly running transport but not running health. Do you think that...
Well, he's going to start off, isn't he? Or she's going to start off...
He or she, yes.
Exactly.
Just because we haven't
and they're going to start off running a budget which is given to them. But in the end, hopefully, the possibility of raising taxes will come in and it'll become much more exciting then.
Now, Trevor, you've been called Peter Mandelson's favourite choice for mayor. Are you finally going to come out and declare your hand?
I find this absolutely unbelievable.
Now, don't be naive with me,
I have no
Trevor.
idea what Peter thinks.
I'm surely you read your own press cuttings.
When I meet Peter, he and I talk about children and skiing, which is...
All right, well, let's leave aside the children and the skiing results. But would you like to be Mayor of London?
Look, it's a long way. It's 2 years before there's an election. There's going to be 9 months before, discussing what the powers and the role of the mayor should be. And the first task is to make sure that we have a mayor and not a mouse, because there is a danger at the moment that what we're going to get is a mouse.
Right. You're aware of the fact that London is made up of many ethnic communities.
Yeah.
Does it bother you that, do you think it's important that the mayor should reflect all the communities in London? I mean, I said earlier in this programme there wasn't a woman that had come forward yet. Yeah. Likewise, who is going to represent all the ethnic communities that make up London?
Well, the one thing I will say is that it would be incredibly disappointing, and I would bust the gut to make sure that when the final lineup happens for London's leadership, that what we're not doing is that we haven't campaigned to hand London back to the old politics and the old politicians. And I personally will do everything in my power to ensure that we don't end up with a lineup of male, white, middle-aged politicians leading London, because that does not reflect London City.
Very good news. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Janet. Well, Robin, this point about Trevor Phillips making about London wanting its money back, this is a recipe for constant conflict.
It's going to be a pretty depressing picture if we get a whole series of elected mayors around the rest of the country, which is what the Labour government wants from this London model, and then they all focus being the strong voice for their community that the government wants. If they all then focus on a sort of whinging and whining battle about the comparative resources that each one is getting in his own particular area. And I have to say that at Labour's local government conference this year, when Tony Blair was there and pushing the idea of these strong figures of elected mayors, I didn't find an awful lot of enthusiasm among the dignitaries of Labour local government for the idea of elected mayors spreading out any wider. I mean, one thing they said, you could get immobilism with the elected mayor pushing in one direction and council or assembly pushing in another area. And they said also, with all the worries there are about corruption, you're giving an awful lot of power to one single figure, and surely the dangers of corruption could be even stronger. That's the argument they were making, but of course they don't want to lose the powers they've got, some of them.
You say there's dangers of corruption. Nick Rainsford says it's within Nolan Commission guidelines. Tony King is on Nolan. Do you think that having a mayor is going to lead to a lot more corruption than there's been so far in local government? Is it going to make things worse?
I'm inclined to doubt it. If you've got one person who's the chief executive, however many people he or she may be able to appoint, the fact is that the local press is going to focus very hard on that person. And I would have thought in late 20th century circumstances, it's very hard indeed for that person to get away with very much. So much of the corruption at the local level is precisely because power is parcelled out to this committee or that committee chairman. I wouldn't have thought this was a very serious worry.
And is it going to work if the mayors can't raise money?
Oh, that's an entirely different question.
Yes, it is entirely different.
It does seem to me that we are getting into a very strange position in this country with regard to Wales and Scotland as well as London, whereas the mayor of Kansas City said you have people, whether councils or mayors, with very considerable powers, in Scotland with enormous powers, but with virtually no capacity to control their own revenues. That's a very, very unusual outcome, and I doubt myself is sustainable in the long run.
Okay, you wanted to pick up one point from the discussion.
Well, I think it's wrong to create this impression, as some people have, that there are very few powers to the mayor. We've devised the structure in a way to ensure that the mayor can be effective, can make a difference, controls a budget of 3.3 billion at the outset, which is a very significant amount of money. So our emphasis is on the mayor getting value for money and achieving results. We're not talking about going back to the old tax and spend models. That would be inappropriate. We want effective results. We want to use money well. But I would stress that we are giving powers. The Mayor of London will have greater powers over transport than the Mayor of New York, who is thought to be a very powerful mayor. That's a rather important thing that no one has really taken into account.
He won't be able to take over the London Underground.
The Mayor will inherit the arrangements that the government put in place, and we've had to act on this because the Underground is chronically underfunded. The public-private partnership will proceed, and the Mayor will inherit that from the Department of Environment, Transport and the Regions.
Let's leave London and go outside London and go north to Sheffield, where Sue Cameron is waiting for us. Sue.
Well, here in Sheffield, the Liberal Democrats have won 5 seats. They've done really well tonight, and they've unseated the Labour leader, Mike Bauer, who is here with me. Mike Bauer, terrible, devastating result for you personally, and yet Sheffield is a Labour stronghold. What went wrong for you?
I don't really know. We didn't expect this to happen. Take us a bit of time to work out why it's happened. What I'm fairly sure of is it's not down to a single thing. A combination of disappointment with the performance of the council, maybe some disappointment with the performance of national government, people expecting a bit more to happen than has happened.
Bit of an end of the honeymoon with Tony Blair up here, do you think?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think it's more to do with people being impatient for more things to have happened than people sort of making a judgment about that performance. What they're doing, though, I think, is firing a warning shot across the bows of the government and an even bigger one across the bows of the council.
Chris Davis, you were an MP up here in the north. Now, the Liberal Democrats have actually lost overall control in about half a dozen councils, and yet here in Sheffield, you've done really well. You haven't won control, but you're poised perhaps to do so next year or the year after. Why Sheffield buck the trend?
Well, in recent years, taking seats from the Conservatives was like picking fruit off a tree. And it can't go on like that. I mean, it's almost inevitable that we're bound to lose a few seats back to the Conservatives, I think, at the edges. What's really interesting is whether over the next couple of years the Liberal Democrats can make deep inroads into Labour's heartlands. And I think tonight the results in Liverpool and in Sheffield certainly indicate that where we can get our act together, where we can get the team working on the ground, then the Labour vote is vulnerable.
You talk about getting your act together. Of course, one of the things that's been going on is the Lib Dems nationally have been cuddling up like anything to Labour. But that isn't what's been happening down here in Sheffield, is it? They're all laying each other.
I listened to Paddy Ashdown on the radio just a week ago, describing the Labour government as having betrayed its election promises on education and health. Now, that's a funny sort of aspect of cuddling up. We're delighted, of course. I think Liberal Democrats across the country are delighted to see the changes in our democratic system, which the Constitutional Committee is pushing ahead with. But the reality is that while there may be a constructive opposition in Westminster, when it comes down to it, on hard issues, we are going at them hammer and tongs.
Well, indeed, Francis Butler, if I can bring you in, you've been a Liberal Democrat councillor here for a very, very long time. You should have been, or were due to perhaps to be mayor over the millennium, and Labour said they wouldn't have you. What do you think? Do you see all this cuddling up to Labour as a possible way forward?
There's certainly no cuddling up. I'm a veteran. I've enjoyed 30 years of battle with Labour. And there's certainly no cuddling up. I'm not prepared to go into bed with Labour. I'm not at all feel sleepy with them. We've had a good democratic battle, and we oppose at municipal level Labour totally here in Sheffield.
Do you think it makes life perhaps difficult though for Paddy Ashdown when there is such a very, very strong battle here? And in other places as well.
It makes life interesting in Sheffield. I was the first Liberal on the City Council, the very first, for 60 years, and now there's 36 of us. We're taking seats in the heartland. This was known as the Socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, Sheffield. This was this bastion in which socialism was born, and we've made tremendous indents into that particular bastion. Paddy's got to realise that in regional areas there is great animosity. It's healthy animosity. It's good, democratic. We're poles apart, we're miles apart. And
it's interesting that actually the Liberal Democrats in Sheffield criticise Paddy Ashdown for cuddling up as much as they criticise me for the policies of the City Council. They're virulent in their criticism of Ashdown. If he was the leader of the Liberal Democrats in Sheffield, we'd have a good working relationship with him.
Briefly, what do you think? Is there anything you can do to try and pull back from this? The abyss, perhaps,
There's not much I can do now, since I'm not a member of the council. But what I did try to do, I wrote to the leaders of the other political groups and asked them to join me in a weekly briefing from the chief executive so that we could try to work together in the interest of Sheffield. And the Liberal Democrats refused, the Tories accepted.
OK, I think we have to leave it there. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Back to London.
Thanks, Sue. Let's just have a look at how things stand now, then. Labour 73 councils. Oh, well, there go the councillors. I was going to just go through the councils, but anyway. Labour down 124 on councillors. Perhaps this is in a funny way, more accurate way of looking at it. Conservatives up 240. The Liberal Democrats are down 88. Independents down 6. And Liberal Democrat gains, they've taken Liverpool. Their losses, 6 of them still. Isle of Wight, West Lindsey, Rochford, Woking, Colchester and Hastings, where they lose control. Conservatives gain control of Tunbridge Wells and Runnymede. And Conservatives hold Wandsworth, and Labour lose control of Cambridge, and they hold on to Trafford, Milton Keynes and Rochdale. And a little bit more on that referendum on London Mayor, 77% yes, 20% no. One other thing we've had from London is that Brent looks as though there's a fairly hefty swing to Labour in Brent. Both Conservatives and Labour were hoping to get Brent, and it looks as though Labour may take the Council of Brent. We shall have more details on that in a moment. And now we're joined by Paddy Ashdown, who's at Liberal Party headquarters in London, I think, Mr. Ashdown, or are you in Yeovil tonight?
What you see behind me is Cowley Street in London. I presume that's David, is that right?
It is, yes.
And nice to be with you, David.
Good evening.
I'm looking at a television camera, so I can't see John and all his gizmos. And
Well, now, let's just have your reaction. You've had one important gain in Liverpool. You've had 6 losses.
David, before this I said that I thought the outcome would be consolidation in some areas and steady growth in the others, and I think that's broadly what's happened. I mean, let me give you a result you haven't yet got on your sets in your control room, but I can tell you it, and it's this, that I understand that in Islington, and you may remember Robin Oakley said very interested to see what the results in Islington would be. Well, I can tell him what the results are going to be. It's now 26 all, with a very substantial number, I'm told something like 10 Liberal Democrat gains, and the final seat for control of Islington Council, the council, of course, of Tony Blair's own home, is now in a recount. Now, we're seeing very substantial gains of that sort, not only in London but elsewhere, and I anticipate by the end of the night, that little scoreboard that you have, which showed us, I think, on 96 losses at the start and 78 at the last, will be within a handful of about even Steven from last time. In my view, a very bad night for the Tories. I mean, let's just reflect on this thought, that if the Tories look tonight as though they're going to be in a less good position than they even were on the night which they delivered the poll tax and had the local elections on poll tax night. You know, they're doing less well than even they were at the time of the poll tax.
Now, does this open the way, in terms of an endorsement of the Liberal Democrats' parliamentary strategy, for you to go into government?
David, I saw your little discussion earlier on, and I know at this late hour you like to spend lots and lots of time on textual analysis, but I must say the weight upon which you put the 2 words I used in the middle of a heated debate in question time is bizarre even for 1:45 in the morning. I'll give you it absolutely straight. Do I think it is likely that Liberal Democrats will be in government with a majority of the Labour Party of 179? No, I do not. I think it is exceedingly unlikely. I can't write it off completely because I can't see in a crystal ball. But I agree with John Prescott. If you'd like to split the difference somewhere between no and exceedingly unlikely, that suits me fine. Want to split any more hairs?
The Charles Kennedy reaction to what you have been doing is clearly confounded, isn't it, tonight, by what I don't know whether you know the result of our polls, which show 2/3 of the country, I think, endorsing your strategy.
Well, that poll, I think, is very encouraging and is a decisive endorsement, as you rightly say, though I'm never a great believer in polls. That one, insofar as polls have a useful part to play, shows such a large majority that I can take comfort from it. But, you know, I've just been speaking to Charles, as it happens, on Radio 5, and he made the point publicly, which he's made to me privately, that the words that he used, that you again put so much weight on, were taken completely out of context and were completely misread. The party has a unanimous view. I think it was unanimous, with the party assembly of nearly 2,000 people voting in favour of this. Your poll shows that it is a policy which the British public like, because they think it's leading to a new, more rational style of politics. Tonight's results, with the party doing extremely well. I mean, for the first time in the history of either the Liberal Democrats or the Liberal Party in the last 50 years, we now control a major metropolitan city in Liverpool, and we may well control yet another London borough in Islington. So this is a night of considerable success in some areas, consolidation in others, a few losses which seem to me almost inevitable.
Mr. Ashdown, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, now I can see Michael Crick, who's turned up in Brick Lane, in the bagel shop. Michael, can you talk to us from there?
Well, I mean, whoever thought of this location for me knew exactly what they were doing, because I'm a mega foodie, and the management have said actually that I'm allowed to eat any of the cakes I like. Anyway, this is actually mainly a bagel factory, and it's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now, Gary is the manager here. How many bagels do you make per hour?
About 1,200, say.
And that's when you're not so busy?
That's when we're not so busy. Weekends is busy, so, you know, we're rushing more.
Now, what about this mayor thing? Who would you like to see as mayor of London?
Probably Richard Branson, although I'm still sceptical whether, you know, a lot of bureaucracy still involved with it. It would be good to have a mayor if they had enough powers from the central government.
Right, now, moving on, we come down here to your colleague Monty, who is making the actual bagels, and what do you actually have to do to them?
I have to cook them.
Yeah, but I mean, how do you cook them? I mean, what are you doing here?
Just put them nicely on a board so they won't stick in the oven, and I cook them and I take them out, nice and ready.
What do you think about a mayor? Who would you like to see as mayor of London?
Me.
If it can't be you, you're declaring as a candidate?
Yeah, why not?
if it can't be you, who would you like to see?
Sammy is the governor here.
Oh, I see.
He should be the mayor of London.
What about Geoffrey Archer? He's one of the contenders. Would you like to see him?
Yeah, why not? Why not? If he...
Richard Branson? Your colleague was saying he'd be a good mayor.
No, Richard Branson, he's too busy. He hasn't got time.
Anyway, let's go into the main shop, which at this time of night is usually surprisingly busy with people, you know, cabbies, lots of cabbies, policemen, and it's one of the few places in London, I suppose, you'll find anybody who's sober. Excuse me, sir. We're from... did you vote in the referendum today?
Yes, certainly did.
Which way did you vote?
I voted yes for the referendum.
And who would you like to see as mayor?
Well, nobody Labour.
Nobody Labour?
Yeah.
What about some of the Conservatives on offer, like Steve Norris?
I'd like to see Richard Branson as the mayor. That'd be good, I think, for London.
In what? Why would that be good?
Well, he's a businessman. He knows what to do, and I don't really think that party politics should be involved in the mayor. I think it'd be good to see somebody that is a bit impartial.
Okay. Well, thanks very much. Now, what about this gentleman over in the corner? Have you decided who you'd like to see as mayor of London? If you get the chance, Ken Livingstone. Why Ken Livingstone?
Because I don't like enthusiastic amateurs. At least he's qualified to do the job. He hasn't got any more money to spend, has he really?
But it looks as if the Labour Party, Tony Blair, may make strenuous efforts to ensure that Ken Livingstone isn't Labour's candidate.
I don't know. He's at least got sympathetic reasoning on both sides, and they must find some way of cooperating, I think.
What about some of these other people who are on offer, like Geoffrey Archer, who's declared?
I don't know. I mean, what about Richard Branson? I mean, he's a very good chap, but it's going to organise transport to suit himself.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks very much indeed. Now let's turn to some of the other people in the shop tonight. Can we ask you, sir, any idea who ought to be mayor of London?
Definitely him.
Well, if it can't be him, who else? Not Neil Kinnock. I'm not sure that Neil Kinnock's in the running for it. Anybody else?
Not Neil Kinnock. What's it about Ken Livingstone?
Ken Livingstone.
Don't know, mate, really. Anyone who does any good, doesn't it? Don't know.
Do you think a mayor will make a difference?
Definitely. Definitely.
In what way?
Sort these traffic jams out, definitely.
How is a mayor going to sort the traffic jams out?
Why do you mean how he's going to sort it? He's going to run London, isn't he? He's going to sort the transport out, everything out, isn't he?
Well, you're very optimistic. What about you, sir? Who would you like to see as mayor of London?
I am again. Ken Livingstone, I think.
Wasn't Ken Livingstone going to clash with Tony Blair if he was to get in?
Yeah, I'm sure he would. That's probably why he won't get it, but it's the same story, isn't it? No one ever gets it who you want to get it. It's as simple as that, really.
A lot of the people here tonight have suggested, and in fact the polls suggest, that Richard Branson would be the favourite. What do you think about him?
I think he's interested in Richard Branson.
Right. Let's ask this. Excuse me, madam. Can we ask you, sir?
No,
who would you like to be?
I'm anti.
You're anti it altogether, right? Okay. Well, who would you like to see as mayor of London? You don't know?
No.
What about Richard Branson? He's been suggested by some of your colleagues.
If he's got enough to do, already.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed, everybody, and I'll get on with getting the breakfast, and it's back to you, David.
Thank you, Michael. I'm glad you didn't carry on eating that sticky bun while you were talking, but you can go and eat it now. Lovely. Where are you going to next, Michael?
Covent Garden, I hope.
Covent Garden.
Yeah.
See you there in a bit. Okay, Peter, can we now have a look at something we haven't talked about, which is London, Labour, I mean, not London, Labour and its prospects?
Indeed. I mean, we're getting rather contrasting signals about Labour. The main one we're getting from our poll is that Labour is incredibly well placed, good image, and of course Tony Blair, predominantly successful as Prime Minister, after a year, when we asked people, after a year in government, when we asked people, did they think, after all, this is a man who'd asked us to trust him at the last election, did they now think Mr. Blair was very or fairly trustworthy, or did they think he was not trustworthy or not trustworthy at all? Just look how it breaks down. 73% of all people, nearly three-quarters, saying he's very or fairly trustworthy, and only a quarter saying that he's not trustworthy. The fact is, of course, that Mr. Blair built a very powerful electoral fortress at the last general election. 44% of the share of the vote, and the biggest Labour majority in history. But like all electoral fortresses, of course, it is built on sand, because the ebb and flow of public opinion can vary quite dramatically. In fact, the first flow of public opinion that came in, the first big wave that came in, pushed Labour's support up to 62% in the ICM poll in June 1997, but then Labour started to dig itself some holes. Starting with Tony Blair going on holiday in August, off he went to Italy, great mix-up over who was running the country. In came the ICM poll in August 97, and it saw Labour's support dropping from 62% to 55% in one fell swoop. Then we had the Formula One row in November. Again, the swirl of public opinion took one of the other outposts from our castle away. Down went Labour to 52% support in the ICM poll in November. And then, of course, we had the confusion over Harriet Harman's social security policy, and we found the ICM poll in January 98, again washing away some more of the fortifications of the castle, putting it down to 48%. But notice, 48% is still 4% higher than Labour's support in the general election last year. So that's a very powerful position for a government to be in months into a new parliament. Now, of course, we have the verdict of people's votes voting in this big local election in London and over much of the rest of the country. What's happened now is that the castle has, if you look at the share of the vote, the projected share of the vote, 37%, really taken a bit of a tilt. Here we see Labour dropping from 44 in the general election down to 37%. But again, I must utter two words of caution. One, the turnout is ludicrously low in this local election, and there are strong signs, our experts tell us, that the turnout is lower in those places where Labour is stronger, indicating that Labour supporters are staying away. And also, we haven't yet had any real results from London. Things could look quite different by the end of the night. David.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. Well, I've got two new guests with me here. Stephen Bowers, the Education Minister, and Jackie Ballard, who's just joined us for the Liberal Democrats. This position of Labour, Stephen Bowers, this 73% support for Tony Blair and all that, is fine and dandy, but isn't there a problem for you that you haven't done that well in the popular vote, and you've had an easy year politically? You've got trouble ahead on a number of decisions about Europe, decisions about the welfare state, which you haven't made. There's grumbling about education. There's grumbling about the NHS.
It's not been an easy year. It's been the first year we've been in office for 19 years, and there were many people predicting that it would be very difficult, and that hasn't been the case. I think what we've seen today are people generally content with the way in which the Labour government has acted over the last 12 months. And what they're doing, I think, is passing verdict on the quality of their own local councils, which is why it's such a mixed picture as you look up and down the country. There's no common thread that can be identified. And I think what we are seeing actually is a renaissance of local government, is people actually looking at their local council and making decisions on the quality of service they've been providing. What is disappointing, I think, is the very low turnout, and that clearly has had an impact in very safe Labour areas. We've been seeing in areas like Salford a turnout of 11%, and that clearly is bound to have an effect nationally in terms of the overall percentage vote for Labour.
And from the Liberal Democrats' point of view, Jackie Ballard, you heard your leader speaking a moment ago saying everything was fine and dandy for the Liberal Democrats. Is everything fine and dandy?
Well, I think we're certainly doing quite well, and probably better than the commentators expect us to do. And we've done very well in terms of our share of the popular vote. We certainly haven't seen a honeymoon effect for the Labour government, which you might have expected to see after the first year. And I think Stephen is right to focus on local decisions, because these are local government elections. And I think that's why there's a very mixed pattern across the country, where in some areas there's particular local issues that people have been voting about. In other areas they've been showing that they are not happy with the way Labour has been running their local council, which is why we've made spectacular gains in places like Liverpool, Sheffield and Islington, which I think we're about hopefully to see the final result in.
And Norman Fowler, your recovery of, what is it now, 241 seats we have you at the moment, this is really a self-inflicted wound in the Tory party, isn't it? I mean, you destroyed local government under Mrs. Thatcher, and it's not surprising that people are rather unkeen to trust you with it now.
Well, I mean, 241 gains is, by any standards, a substantial number of gains. I mean, the important thing, I think, of this elections for us is that we've made 240 gains, Labour have lost 124, the Liberals have lost 88. And what also is the position is that if you take somewhere like Wandsworth, if this was simply a replay of the general election, then we would have lost Wandsworth. So this scenario, which, if you don't mind me saying so, was set out a bit at the beginning of this programme, that this was going to be a disaster evening for the Tories, hasn't remotely come about. I think this has shown a step-by-step recovery for the Conservatives, a long way to go, but a good performance by our council candidates all around the country.
OK, let's turn back to this issue of the mayor for a moment then. Thank you very much. We've got this referendum going on, and we know not many people have taken part in it, but those that have taken part have overwhelmingly endorsed the idea of a mayor for London. And Tony Blair's idea is that all over the country, councils, if there's a demand for it, will hold a referendum and get a mayor if that's what the areas want. But who really does want it? We heard Robin Oakley saying that at the Labour local government conference, a lot of people were dubious about the advantages of having a mayor. Up in Liverpool is we're joined by a famous figure who caused Labour a lot of trouble in the past, Derek Hatton, and with him Adrian Henry, who's a Merseyside poet. Mr. Hatton, you in favour of a mayor for Liverpool?
David, good evening, how are you?
All right.
Good. Well, I think what we've seen tonight in Liverpool is quite indicative, really, that we've seen not only just a Liberal victory, we've also seen a 20% turnout. Now, in 1984, we had a 55% turnout. Now, somewhere along the line, whichever side of the fence you're on, you've got to suggest that people are not really interested in what's happening, and they're not really giving support. And perhaps it's an indication as well that there is need for some sort of personification of what's going on, because the Labour Party has probably put forward a number of ideas over the past year or so, which have been good ideas, and some things have come to fruition, some haven't. But at the end of the day, people aren't really sure what's happening, and they don't see something they can latch onto. And I think that perhaps it's, even if I hadn't have agreed with the idea of an elected mayor before, after the result tonight, I'm certainly clear now that it would be a good idea.
Adrian Henry, what do you think?
Yes, I'm very much for it, actually. I think that, well, you know, Liverpool, tonight is just one of a long series of disasters as far as running Liverpool is concerned. And on the other hand, what was very good while it lasted was the Merseyside County Council, which was abolished, as you know, by the Conservative government. And my particular constituency, which is the arts, was wonderfully handled by the County Council, and it's been a disaster ever since they were taken away. And I think what we need is some kind of arm's length policy, so that somebody is there who is not immediately tied to local and national political issues, but can stand aside from that, take an arm's length view of things, and simply decide what is best for the town in all kinds of areas.
But do you think they'll get sufficient powers given them from the centre? Do you think sufficient powers will be given them from the centre to make it a job that's a man's job?
I mean, obviously that's a very important question, and certainly if I was Tony Blair or Peter Mandelson, I'm not sure I'd want to be pushing the idea of elected mayors in the cities anyway, because the one certain thing is they're going to become the personification of the different single issue groups that are around the city. And to be honest, I find it difficult to understand why they're actually supporting it. But nonetheless, I mean, the only way it can exist is if they've got the real powers. If they haven't got the powers, it's pointless having them there. It'll just be simply another figurehead, which is the last thing that places like Liverpool want.
OK, let's go to Birmingham, which in the past was famous for having very, very powerful mayors at the turn of the century. It was a city that generated itself on the basis of having mayors who spoke for it. We're joined there by Andy Howells, who's a Labour councillor. Are you in favour of a mayor for Birmingham?
No, I'm not convinced, David. I think in London the argument for doing something about fragmented government was overwhelming. In other big cities, that isn't the case. We have strong local government, and I think one of the worries we have is the relationship between a mayor and its city council. Maybe that might lead to fragmentation of politics here rather than bringing it together. I suspect that most people in the big cities are much more interested in politics that look to decentralise or devolve power rather than centralise it around one figure.
And after the low turnout this time round, will there be an appetite for a referendum even in Birmingham? I mean, do you think it's actually going to come to a referendum on whether you should have one or not?
No, I'm not sure there is. I mean, people aren't complacent about a local government, and the low turnout figures are a concern to us all here too. I think local government in general around the country, though, wants time to experiment with perhaps a number of different methods of reforming local government to see which work best. And there is a great concern about, in a sense, an elected mayor which is very much a development-led agenda, and local authorities, the best of which are doing a lot to decentralise power and to try and build up local communities. And there isn't the swathe of mass public support for this that there is in London.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's go to Sheffield, where the Labour leader was defeated tonight, and he was very much anti the idea of a mayor for Sheffield. Jan Wilson is there, Labour councillor. You in favour of a mayor for Sheffield?
Well, I can't really see I'm not yet convinced of what's going to be added to the process of local government by this idea of an elected mayor. Even though Sheffield, of course, were disappointed this evening with our results, it still seems that the sort of ward democracy that we have offers the most stable and community responsive sort of government that I'd like to see continue. We're also developing, aren't we, regional assemblies and a regional structure. So for major strategic issues, we've got that becoming established. So I've yet to be convinced by what would be added to the process by this elected mayor.
If you had a powerful chief executive in the form of a mayor, might you have avoided some of the pickle you've got into over debt and all the rest of it that's caused you such trouble tonight?
Oh, I think the history of Sheffield politics is a lot longer than and can't just be put together in the idea of one strong executive position. Now, we've had a difficult position in Sheffield for several years now. I think it's widely known that we've suffered greatly from Conservative central government, and we're beginning to pull that back again now. Not quick enough for us, of course, but I'll still stick with the system we've got.
Michael Corner is there as well in Sheffield, chairman of Destination Sheffield. I'm not quite sure what Destination Sheffield is, since you presumably are there, but anyway, you could explain it and say your view about a mayor.
Destination Sheffield is the promotion arm of the city on tourism, conferences and the external image of the city, and I have the privilege to be its chairman. In terms of a mayor, I would say certainly it's a good idea for London, where with 32 boroughs you've got a dissipated situation and nobody speaking on behalf of one of the major cities of Europe, if not the world. What you have got in the rest of the major cities, however, are long-standing circumstances where mayors do exist, although not of the type that would be directly elected. I also remain to be convinced that this would be a good idea, and one of my concerns would be that the method by which the people would be elected would inevitably become, first of all, political, and secondly, the playground of the rich. And I'm not sure that either the political party apparatus is the right way to elect somebody to stand on behalf of a city rather than a political party, or secondly, that those who can afford it along the American line would also be the right sort of people. If you actually could get people who are independent, and I've always discovered in local government that independent certainly doesn't mean that, it means all kinds of other things. If you had someone genuinely independent, genuinely concerned for the city, genuinely able to put a city-wide perspective on things, irrespective of what the local authority complexion might be, that perhaps could work. But I suspect that is utopia. And what you're going to get inevitably is a more American-style system where the political parties fund the circumstance, or the fact that people have got a lot of money funds it, and I'm not sure that is a good thing.
And what do you think Sheffield will vote if they have a referendum on it? I mean, London had this overwhelming referendum, albeit on hardly anybody voting. But do you think,
well, yes,
what do you think would happen in Sheffield?
I think you'd get the same sort of pattern, 3.5, 4 to 1, but again on a very low turnout, because local government simply doesn't excite people, unfortunately. And no matter how much we all think it ought to do, unfortunately it doesn't. If there was to be an election, then the 34, 35% that you've had in London, I think would be perhaps even lower in Sheffield. Maybe come the day it could be slightly different. At the moment, it's a long way down the line as far as Sheffield's concerned. It's very much a London thing at present, and Sheffield simply isn't excited by it, any more than I suspect is Liverpool or Birmingham.
I mean, the whole point of having mayors was that it would excite people, wasn't it? That was one of the ideas.
Well, yes, and it's a wonderful idea if it works. Anything that actually brings back a stimulus to local government and excites people about local government might be useful. But one of the first steps the government could take, whether it be a Conservative administration or a Labour administration, would be to get rid of a lot of the centrist operations that it has and begin to devolve real powers back to local government.
OK, let's just go briefly back to Birmingham and Andy Howells. Do you have any comment on what you've heard from Sheffield? Anything relevant there for you?
Well, I think we agree with much of what's been said. I think people are frustrated about politics because it isn't close enough to them in terms of their everyday lives and everyday issues. And I think in the regional level, I think people worry that a powerful mayor figure rather like the kind of thing we see in the States, would actually take politics further away from people and their everyday lives. And I think that's why there isn't the groundswell of public opinion in support of it than you would see in London. It's a very different kettle of fish out in the regions.
Good, thank you very much indeed. Well, let's catch up on the London referendum, Peter, can we?
They are at last day beginning to pile in. They're counting in 33 areas, the City of London, the smallest there, and now the boroughs are beginning to pile in here. There you can see Sutton down there and Lewisham. And they're all saying green for yes, and there's the green chunk of that column of votes there, very small electorate in the City of London. But you see quite a substantial no coming in there in the red on the top of the Wandsworth column there and the Lewisham column there. So quite a lot of people are saying no to a mayor in London. Very low turnout, of course. Now, here's our racecourse. There's Tower Bridge, the aim of either side that wants to get an overall majority of the entire electorate. And here is Westminster Bridge, the start point here. There we are, bouncing away in the river under Westminster Bridge. There's the green vote for yes, the red vote for no, and off they go. And you can see clocking up there with the red vote left far behind, the green vote stopping at 184,369. And, of course, whichever vote wins this race will win the referendum. But the nearer that win is to Tower Bridge, the more convincing that victory will be. 2.5 million votes for either side would be half of London's electorate. It's not going to happen anything like that, because the turnout that we have is something very low indeed, as we'll see in a moment. 184,000 for yes, turnout of just exactly a third of London's 5 million electorate, 63,000 no. The yeses have it then by 74% to 26%. And our forecast is at the end of the night, it'll look very much the same as that, something like 3 to 1 yes against only 25% no. David.
Thanks very much, Peter. We've been joined by Christopher Chope, who's a former leader of Wandsworth Council and is now an shadow environment spokesman, is that right? Local government spokesman. What do you make of these results you've had in?
Well, obviously, I'm delighted at what's happened in Wandsworth. It just shows what can be done when you have a good Conservative council which provides Conservative policies which appeal to the electorate.
You've held Wandsworth and you've held Westminster. Where are your disappointments tonight?
Well, obviously we would have liked to have gained even more seats, and we're obviously losing seats in some places, although overall we are get more seats than we had before. So we're pleased. I mean, it's a good night for us because we're going to end up with a lot more councillors than we had before.
And Brent, perhaps we ought to go to Brent and find out what's happening there, because both Labour and Conservative were after it, and Max Cotton is there. Max, what's the news from Brent?
Well, I mean, Brent, if anything, is the flip side of the Wandsworth record. We haven't had anything like all the results in yet, but Brent have been counting the marginals first, and as far as I can see, there's no question that Labour will have overall control of Brent Council. I expect something like an 18 or 20 seat majority. I think they've done two things. One, they've made great big inroads into the Tory heartlands at the north of this borough, which they did exactly the same as they did at the general election. And they've also finally buried the bogeyman, which is the old sleazy Labour image. With me is Paul Boateng, one of Labour's Brent MPs. I'm going to allow you to have a short crow.
Hear me, I gloat. A great night for Brent, a great night for Labour, but I think it's a ringing endorsement of what Tony Blair has done with the Labour Party, what the leadership in Brent, the new Labour leadership in Brent have done. We've delivered an efficient council, a caring council, a council that represents the best of new Labour in local government, and the people of Brent have endorsed it overwhelmingly.
But it's also unfinished business as far as the general election is concerned.
No, it is building on the general election. I mean, Labour's delivered on its pledges on education, delivered on its pledges on law and order, delivered on its pledges on the health service, right the way across the board. The people trust Labour in Brent, and they have rewarded us tonight.
And the balmy Brent image is gone.
Well, we know in Brent that the balminess and the looniness has always, in any event, been exaggerated. But for the past many years, it's been found in the Tory party, not in the new Labour Party. And we have, for one...
Sorry, we seem to be rather losing pictures from there. But Christopher Chope, you get the message. Brent clearly hasn't gone Conservative as you were hoping. It looks as though it's gone Labour. So Labour has laid loony Labour to rest.
Not necessarily. I think there's a bit of an overhang from the general election in Brent. I think that the morale of the Conservatives on the ground was very, very damaged by the disappointing results there, and it's a disappointment that obviously we we are losing seats there rather than gaining them this time.
Labour gained Harrow, and you failed to gain Croydon too, speaking in the London area.
Yes, but we actually increased the number of seats in Wandsworth, and it's an extraordinary phenomenon in a sense happening in London, and it looks as though in places like Kingston we're also going to be gaining seats.
Let's just catch up with the Wandsworth result. Lance Price is there. What was the final outcome in Wandsworth?
The final outcome was that the Conservatives picked up a net 5 seats. They won 6, but they also lost 1 to Labour, so a net gain of 5 seats here, including some seats that have been Labour for some time, Roehampton in particular in the south-west of the constituency, big council estates down there, which voted Conservative on this occasion. Low turnout, as we've been seeing elsewhere in the country and certainly in London, but also a feeling that Labour didn't manage to get their vote out. There was what the Anoraks like to call differential turnout. The Conservatives turned out in larger numbers than Labour did, and it certainly resulted in Wandsworth being yet again a good news story for the Conservatives.
Thanks, Lars. Stephen Bowes.
Well, to make the point really that the Brent result is very good for Labour, but taken alongside Labour getting overall control of Harrow, I mean, these are spectacular results. For Labour to have control of Harrow, and we gained 15 seats in Harrow today, is really a very good result, reflecting what we did in the general election last year. And I have to say, if the Conservatives are not making inroads into what we achieved last year with a Labour landslide, they really have got great difficulties ahead.
In London? You think London is typical of the country as a whole, do you?
Well, it's a mixed picture. We've done well in Hastings, in Gloucester, in Colchester. We clearly haven't done well in Liverpool, in Calderdale, and there are lessons to be learnt there. And I think what we've seen are people looking very critically at the standard of service that their council's providing, and if it's not coming up to scratch, they've voted against them. Where Liberal Democrats have been in control, they've also been losing seats badly. And so I think there are lessons to be learnt by all parties, and certainly Labour will learn lessons from our experiences this evening.
And you may learn some lessons from some of the things that have happened in London councils where you had what are politely called your little local difficulties. Hackney, for instance, and Tim Donovan is down there. Tim?
Yes, well, there's been one result here at Hackney so far, but a major casualty. The leader of the Labour group on the council has lost his seat. He's lost it to the Greens in his ward. John McCafferty was leader of the council when Labour won it in 1994, but since then, of course, there's been this split. He was leader at the time that the council split, and a number of the councillors opposed his style and opposed him, and they've stood as Liberal Democrats and Tories. Well, Mr McCafferty is with me now. This is obviously a personal blow to you, and would you ever have expected it?
What happened this evening and today, I believe, was simply that the Labour vote in Hackney did not come out. It certainly didn't come out in the numbers that we would have wanted.
The fact that it didn't come out indicates what? That people really are blaming you for the chaos that's been in this borough over the past few years.
I think it's a bit more complex than that, but clearly people in Hackney are saying they are not satisfied with the Labour Party. I accept that we have not done enough to convince them that we had put a house in order and that we were fit and confident to run the council. I would accept that judgment on the North D4 result and possibly overall.
If you're not winning safe wards like this one, like your own, what does this mean for Labour tonight?
Well, the vote tonight, we don't know yet. It will be mixed. Clearly, we would have wanted and had hoped to win North D4. But we don't know how the end result is going to look. There is going to be voting.
We're hearing in Brent that Labour are doing well. They're putting the loony image behind them. Here it looks the opposite might be happening. You just can't get rid of this image.
No, I think people have looked over the past few years. They elected a Labour Council in '94. They have clearly not been happy with what happened inside the Labour Party. That has affected the result tonight. I think a number of other factors have. There has been a large degree of apathy. Our returns, people were saying, yes, we will vote Labour, but they didn't actually come out and do so. So it's a bit more complex than simply saying...
But where from here, just briefly, I mean, how do you claw back credibility if you're going to be losing in places like this?
I think the first message which the Labour Party in Hackney has to give out is that it's a united party. Parties which split, where there has been internal wrangling, historically don't win. And I think that's affected us, even though I would want to argue that, in fact, the Labour Party has sorted itself out. It possibly didn't do it quickly enough and didn't get that message through to the electorate quickly enough. But people are still there. Hackney will continue to vote Labour. We will take the seats back.
But with not you as a councillor or as leader
No,
at the moment.
fair enough. That's the view of the people of North Depot. That's democracy.
Thank you very much indeed.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks very much. Let's have a look now at how things stand. Still not much increase on these councils because the London boroughs, the 32 London boroughs, are still most of them busy counting. But the total so far, 79 for Labour, up 1, Liberal Democrats 12, down 5, the Conservatives 8, up 2, Labour Control up 2. But since most of those are changes of just 1/3, what we're really looking at is the change in the number of councillors and the share of the vote. Here are the councillors. Labour down 129, the Conservatives up 243, Liberal Democrats down 84, the Independents down 8, others down 22. And Liberal Democrat gain control of Liverpool from the rather confused no overall control with lots of different brands of Labour. Liberal Democrat losses the Isle of Wight, where they did have a majority of 14. The whole of the Isle of Wight Council was up for election yesterday. West Lindsey, Rochford, Woking, Colchester and Hastings. Conservatives, gains in Tunbridge Wells and Runnymede. Conservative holds their 2 flagships of Wandsworth and Westminster in London. Labour gains Harrow, which they think the Tories should have held at a good time, and Labour hold on to Croydon, Hull, Trafford, Rochdale and Milton Keynes, lose control of Cambridge. John Prescott speaking on this programme about this very low turnout. We've had 26%. We're concerned about the turnout. We've got lots of ideas for local government reform to increase participation. And Paddy Ashdown, the leader of the Liberal Democrats, also on this programme. We've seen consolidation in some areas, steady growth in others. It's a bad night for the Tories. And Sir Norman Fowler, Conservative environment spokesman, step by step we're recovering. The signs are of people coming back to the Conservatives. And on that referendum on London, this is how it looks at the moment: 76% yes, 24% no, very closely in line with the polls, but again a very low turnout there. So now let's go and hear a bit about what's been going on in Birmingham. We join Jane Corbyn.
Well, here in Birmingham, Labour have held the council, but the Conservatives had hoped to just squeeze ahead of the Liberal Democrats to become the main party of opposition, which the Liberal Democrats took over at the last local election. And in fact, they've just done it. They've now got 17 seats to the Liberal Democrats' 16. They've taken 3, 2 from Labour, 1 from the Liberal Democrats. And with me are Julie Kirkbride, who's the Conservative MP for Bromsgrove, John Hemming, a Liberal councillor here in Birmingham, and Gisela Stewart, who's a Labour MP for Edgbaston. Julie Kirkbride, you've just done it, 3 seats there, but it's a very narrow margin, no real sign of recovery, not here in Birmingham and not nationally either.
Well, I don't think that's the case. Here in Birmingham tonight, we are the only party with something to smile about, something to celebrate. We are now the official opposition on Birmingham Council, which is a place that we want to be in. We obviously want to regain control of Birmingham City Council. But the fact is that we are now the main opposition, and that is something that is very important. We've done that across the country. We've deprived the Liberal Democrats in a variety of seats now of control of the council, so we are clearly on our way back. And what I'm really...
Clearly on your way back. That's overstating the case, surely.
Well, I don't think so, because in the national opinion polls over the weekend, we have been in free fall according to the national press. We are clearly not in free fall. We have made gains here in the Midlands. We are making gains across the country. We are not in free fall. We've held steady, and we have made modest gains. I accept they are modest, but nevertheless, we are on our way back. There is no enthusiasm for the Labour Party and the Labour government. Their national opinion poll ratings bears no resemblance to the real poll, what we've seen in these elections. And the Liberal Democrats, I'm afraid, are clearly on the way down.
John Hemming, you're no longer the main party of opposition here in Birmingham. You always claim to be the voice of local government. That's not the case here tonight.
Well, my vote went up by 3%. In the constituency, we're up to 63.3%.
But you're no longer the main party of opposition.
We've lost an excellent councillor in Christine Ransom-Hollis, which is very sad. She was a very good councillor. It's sad that she's gone. If we hadn't lost that seat by 163 votes to the Tories, we would be the opposition, not them. So it was very, very close. There was 163 votes in it. I think the issue you should be looking at in this city is actually what's happening in the inner cities to the Labour vote when they lose seats like Small Heath to an independent campaign.
But of course the Liberal Democrats have had major losses throughout the country, at least 6, as we know it at this time.
Well, I don't know the details of the results from the other areas of the country, because you do actually have to look at the individual seats and what's happening in the individual seats. I understand we're doing very well in some urban areas against Labour. I'm the sort of Liberal Democrat who has no time for the Labour Party, so I'm obviously very happy to see that we're making progress against the Labour Party.
Gisela Stewart, one of the things that's coming out here in Birmingham tonight and across the country is exceedingly low turnout. In some of the wards here as low as 17%, 26% overall in Birmingham. There's no enthusiasm for Labour for anyone, really.
Actually, it shows that there is enthusiasm. They're thinking the government and the local council are doing a very good job. What I found on the doorstep is people felt they've done the job last year. People said to me, but, you know, we voted for you last year. And they felt, you know, things are right. The significant thing, if you look at Birmingham, Dennis Minnis defended Edgbaston, has never had a Labour councillor, ever. In 1994, he took that seat, and he held on to it. And that, to me, is an extraordinary sign of that, you know...
so you don't accept that there's just no interest in it, and that's why small numbers of people have turned out here in Birmingham, and indeed across the country?
No, I accept that there's a lack of interest, and there's a low turnout, but the conclusions I draw from that is that there's no enthusiasm for going yet again to the ballot box, because people are actually quite happy with what the government is doing and what the local councils are doing.
Julie Kirkbride? Well, there's no enthusiasm for a Labour government. I think it's totally disingenuous what Gisela is saying, and actually really rather naive in comparison to what her voters are actually thinking. It cannot possibly be true that they don't understand the difference between a local election and a national election. That's a preposterous thing to say.
But she's got a point. They still hold Birmingham Council comfortably.
Yes, comfortably. They still hold Birmingham City Council, but not enough seats came up this time for us possibly to win it back. And the fact is that in Edgbaston, I'm afraid we won one seat. So we're clearly chomping at her heels, and we'll be back again next year to win more.
Thank you all.
Now, let's have a look at London. We've had a few more results in. We said they'd count late, and they have been counting late, but now, at last, the results from the London borough seem to be coming in. Peter?
It gets more and more fascinating, David. I mean, the London referendum may be a foregone conclusion. The London boroughs and what's happening to the share of the vote in London is rather more interesting. Here we have the situation. We have altogether 6 Labour wins so far, 3 Conservatives, no Lib Dems yet, and 1 no overall control. Havering has just found it couldn't produce a clear winner. But you notice the Tories have taken the 3 jewels in the crown that they held last time. Only 1 more to come. Bromley here. There's Wandsworth, Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster. Bromley still to come. Just a chance that the Tories could lose Bromley. Now, the changes then. One big change. Here is Labour moving up to take Harrow from no overall control, overtaking the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. Quite a dramatic win that. Unexpected. Labour taking Harrow. So what's happening in London? The answer is that the change in the share of the vote in London is rather different from what it is in the rest of the country. If you remember, the change, again, we're talking about the change on the 1994 election, local election, when these seats were last contested. If you remember, this red block was going downwards nationwide, minus 5%. Here in London, Labour's up 1% on what was for Labour a good election in 1994. The Tories, in a very bad election in 1994, up just 1%, and the Liberal Democrats down 3%. So, again, the message we're beginning to get from London is that Labour are doing rather better here than they are in the rest of the country. Things could look a little different with that share of the vote, the pattern of the share of the vote all over the country. David?
Peter, thank you very much. Down at Church House is Jon Sopel. Is the excitement mounting, John, as the results of the referendum on the mayor come through?
We haven't finished yet, David. We haven't finished yet. I can tell you, I want to get out my red and green crayons because I want to paint in more of Tower Bridge, because we've had 14 results now. 488,561 say yes, that's 74.8%. Around 164,000 say no, that's 25.2%. Now, this is the hall where the results have been declared. And if you think this lacks atmosphere, let me take you now over to where the party's taking on, because I'm sure you'll want to get up now and leave the studio.